In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. In South Carolina, Jaime Harrison is in a dogfight with longtime Senator Lindsey Graham to represent that state in the United States Senate. That race is neck and neck, and Jaime Harrison joins us right now on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Jaime, it's kind of, first of all, glad to have you back.
It's good seeing you.
Go right ahead. I can't hear you. Go ahead again.
I said it's good seeing you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Now I can hear you. Sorry, that was a microphone that was open. Now I can hear you. I've been sort of laughing because your opponent, Lindsey Graham, who has done everything he could to kiss Donald Trump's butt, now he is trying to hit you on your taxes. This was a video that his folks put out a little bit earlier. Folks, play this.
I've released 11 years of my tax returns. Where are your tax returns? How did you make your money?
So, he had nothing to say about Donald Trump's taxes. Now all of a sudden he cares about taxes?
Roland, it really is funny, man. And it's sort of sad to see this man who's been in Washington, D.C. for 25 years just become so desperate. But he's seeing what we're seeing on the ground, but he's also seeing what we're seeing in the polls. He's about to lose his job. And he's trying everything that he can right now to throw at the wall in order to try to make some traction. But ultimately, it's this. This is a grassroots movement we've been building here in South Carolina for almost 2 years because we've been focused on the issues that people care about. This is a guy who said over our dead bodies will we allow an extension of the unemployment benefits. And we have 750,000 people who have filed for unemployment here in South Carolina. This is the month where they're getting their kids ready to go back to school. So they need school supplies. They have to, 400,000 of those folks have to pay for their own health care now because they lost their health care and they're now on COBRA. And so he's just been disconnected. He's detached. And right now it's coming back to roost because the people are saying through the polls, through the fundraising, that what he's been selling for 25 plus years, they don't want it anymore.
One of the things that also that is interesting is that we've run the ad before. I mean, Lindsey Graham was extremely critical of Donald Trump in 2016. I mean, called him a quack, talked about him being a racist, saying that electing him would be the end of the Republican Party. But I don't know of anybody else who has sold their soul to Donald Trump as much as Lindsey Graham.
Well, it's shameful. It really is, because in the end of the day, the people in South Carolina want somebody with a backbone, somebody with a spine who could stand up and do what's right. And we can't count on Lindsey Graham. And many of us are disappointed. And it's partly, Roland, because we had some respect for Lindsey Graham. When John McCain was alive, we thought Lindsey Graham was one of those type of people that even though if we didn't agree with him all the time, that at the end of the day, he would do what's in the best interest of the state and the nation and would rise above the political fray. But what we see that this guy is a con artist. All he wants is political power, and he will say and do anything in order to get it.
You talked about the issues that matter. What do you think this race is going to come down to in South Carolina? Is it going to come down to health care? Is it going to come down to the economy? Is it going to come down to education? What are you emphasizing to get folks to support you over the incumbent?
All of the above. And what I just did, Roland, was about 2 weeks ago, almost 3 weeks ago, I rolled out my HOPE agenda for rural communities in South Carolina. In essence, it's a 5-part plan looking at healthcare, education, economic opportunities, infrastructure, and also it included a Farmers' Bill of Rights. Because when you look at South Carolina, she's at the top of all of the bad lists, and at the bottom of all the good lists. And part of that reason is because our rural communities, and rural in South Carolina is just as diverse as urban, but our rural communities are in desperate need to be rebuilt and be revitalized. And so in this plan, we have all kinds of things. So a new game plan for historically Black colleges and universities. We create on the campuses there what I call rural centers of excellence, where we match up these communities with our HBCUs, and we allow those HBCUs to do technical assistance to those rural communities to help the mayors and the county administrators with understand grants, federal grants, and all of these different things. And so we're really, really excited about it, and it addresses an issue in an area that nobody other than Jim Clyburn is really paid much attention to for the past 20 or 30 years. And so healthcare in particular is the number one of those issues, but we're about focusing our efforts on rebuilding and revitalizing rural communities here in South Carolina, and that will lift all boats.
For years, African Americans like Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. have talked about the voting power of Black folks in South Carolina, how you have a number of African Americans who are not on the voting rolls, a number of African Americans who are not registered, who are not using their power. And so how are you really reaching those folks to get them to understand that your vote sitting at home is simply a wasted vote? And so what kind of campaign? Man, obviously, you're going to need votes of whites in North South Carolina and others, but you're going to need a massive Black turnout if you're going to beat Lindsey Graham.
Yeah, amen to that. And we are trying our very best to do everything that we can, Roland, to get into the African American communities. Now, the coronavirus complicates things. So some of the things that we would normally do, we can't do right now. You know, all of the various gatherings or what have you. But what we are trying to do is an all of the above approach. We're focusing on voter registration like a laser. Right now, for the first time ever, we now have over 1 million people of color, and the vast majority of that, probably about 95% of that, African Americans. And they're for the first time over 1 million people of color that are registered to vote here in South Carolina. We still have large pockets, though, of unregistered Black voters. And we've been working with civic organizations, Greek organizations, the churches and all to make sure that we are reaching out to get those folks registered. We still have about 2.5, 3 weeks to get that registration up. And we're going to do everything that we can. We're on Black radio. We've saturated that. We've saturated the Black newspapers, working with barbershops and beauticians, with the Greek organizations. We have an adoptive precinct program where we are partnering with civic organizations to get out into their individual precincts in their communities. So we are taking a very, very aggressive approach to reach African American voters here in South Carolina, to get them educated and to the polls.
Questions from my panel. I'll first start with Joseph Pinion. Joseph?
Hey, how are you? Well, obviously, thanks so much for joining us. I want to talk to you a little bit about, obviously, the issues that you're talking about in this campaign. I think, obviously, we have a political divide on some of these issues when we start talking about how do we provide health care for all people, whether that is through something like universal Medicare for all, or whether that's talking about leveraging free markets, talking about allowing people to buy health insurance across state lines. As you travel around South Carolina, obviously a very red state, what is the pushback that you're getting, and how do you try to bridge that partisan divide on issues like healthcare, on issues like justice, where I do think we do have the ability in D.C. and I think across this nation to bring people together around issues that we've been previously divided on?
Well, Joseph, a fantastic question, man. Listen, when I first started this race, I told people this. In the end of the day, this is not about Democrats versus Republicans, progressives versus conservatives, left versus right. It's about doing what's right versus what's wrong. And ultimately, we have communities here in South Carolina. South Carolina is one of 12 states where we did not expand Medicaid through the Affordable Care Act. And as a result, there are about 250,000 people in the state right now who don't have health care, but if they lived in 38 other states, they would. We've had 4 of our rural hospitals that have closed over the past few years. And if you live in those communities, it doesn't matter if you vote for me or Lindsey Graham, you vote for Joe Biden or Donald Trump. But if you have a heart attack or a stroke or complications with diabetes, and now it takes you, instead of 10 minutes to go to the hospital, it takes you 25 or 35 or 45 minutes. That's a death sentence. And again, it doesn't matter whether you have a D or an R behind your name. That's just the reality of the situation. And so what I am doing on this race is not talking about, which is the fancy bill in Washington, D.C. that one party is supporting over other. I'm saying, how do we keep our rural hospitals open? How do we make sure that just a few years ago here in South Carolina, 14 of our 46 counties had no OBGYNs. Think about that. You are in a county and there is no OBGYN and you're having a baby. What do? What if you don't have the transportation to go to another county? These are the practical bread and butter issues that people, Democrats, Republicans, and independents are dealing with. And we've had a senator who's been in Washington for 25 years and he hadn't done a thing about it. And so that's what I'm focused on. And by focusing on that, that's why we're making the traction right now with Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And that's why Lindsey Graham's unhinged at this point in time.
Mustafa.
Jaime, good to see you.
Good to see
I know
you, brother.
that you too, brother. There's a small percentage of African-American men who sometimes will vote Republican, and many times they say it's about jobs. Can you talk about how the new clean economy and other jobs are a part of the message that you're bringing?
Yeah, well, and that's a huge component for what we are trying to build with our rural plan. But let's back up. Even before my rural plan, let's look at the COVID situation that we're in right now. South Carolina is 50th in the nation in terms of PPP dollars for small businesses. That's Lindsey likes to talk all the time about his relationship with the president. But I'm like, dude, if all you can do is get South Carolina to be the very last state in terms of money going to our small businesses, you need to upgrade your relationship, because we need something out of that relationship that we currently aren't getting. And when you drill down even further, 90% of Black businesses, small businesses in South Carolina, were locked out of getting any of those PPP dollars coming out of that program. We have to do better. And so what we're seeing is Black barbershops and beauticians and restaurants and small stores all closing. And they can't reopen because they don't have the access to capital. They don't have the relationships with the big banks. And so we got to do better. And part of my rural plan is to do that, to make sure that we create access to capital so that these businesses, if you have an idea, you have the drive, you just don't know the know-how and the technical know-how or have the access to the capital, we are setting up a program that will allow you to do that. Partnering through the historically Black colleges and universities to provide you with that technical assistance so that you can grow those opportunities. We're also setting up apprenticeship programs because we have all of these large corporations here. You have Michelin, you have Boeing and Volvo and all of these other things. Well, none of the African Americans in these communities that are surrounding these companies are actually a part of that pipeline going into those companies. So we're creating partnerships with the high schools in those communities so that there's a direct pipeline to get some of these young kids into those large corporations so that they can have good paying jobs to take care of themselves and their families. And so we're doing a lot in our program to try to bring more opportunity so that we can see close that wealth gap that we see between different ethnic groups.
Let's go to final question from Avis Jones-Weaver.
Hello there. Running statewide for the U.S. Senate is never easy for any Black candidate. But running statewide as a Black candidate who's also a Democrat in a red state, that makes it even more difficult. Yet you are running a race that is for neck and neck, it seems, with Lindsey Graham, someone who has been in the Senate for God knows how long. That said, if you were to win, if you were to pull out a victory against Donald Trump's right-hand man here, what would that say, not just for you and the strategies that you've put in place for your campaign, but what would that say for the future of Black politics, and particularly for the future of Black politics in the South?
Yeah. So I often, and we are going to win this race. As my grandma said, you got to claim it. We are going to win this race. And I have been saying from day one that this race is about closing the chapter on the old South and opening a brand new book called The New South, a new South that is bold, that is inclusive, that is diverse, where all of us are heard and our voices matter, right? That's really, really important. And so what I'm doing is I'm dispelling those myths that have been out there that, oh, Black folks can't, you can't run statewide because you can't raise any money, or you can't beat a long entrenched incumbent like Lindsey Graham. We saw what Stacey Abrams was able to do, how close she came, and she would be the governor right now had it not been for the suppressive efforts that took place in that state. And so what I've done is taken the lessons learned from Stacey's race, taken the lessons learned from Andrew and Beto's race, and applied that to our race. So we have built up a mechanism to make sure that we're going to fight back against any suppressive activities that we see. At the same time, I want you all to understand how important this is to our history and to this region as well. This seat that I am vying for was the seat of John C. Calhoun. This seat was the seat of a man called Pitchfork Ben Tillman, who would go to the floor of the United States Senate and talk about the joy of lynching of Black folks. This was the seat of Strom Thurmond. And currently, this is a seat that Lindsey Graham occupied. South Carolina, the very first state that seceded from the Union because of the issue of slavery, and let's call it like it is, will become, when I win this race on November 3rd, the very first state to have 2 African-American senators serving at the very same time. And so this seat is so important. It's important because it is the next chapter of how we evolve and move forward. And so that's why I ask everybody, if you want to be a part of this, you want to be a part of history, go to JaimeHarrison.com, be a part of our movement, volunteer, make phone calls, send postcards, make a contribution. All of those things are important because we can really close the chapter on the old and start a whole brand new chapter or a brand new book when we win on November 3rd.
All right, Jaime Harrison, we certainly appreciate it, man. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you, Roland. Take care, bud.
Good luck. All right, folks, back to that Roland Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment. As our community comes together to support the fight against racial injustice, I want to take a second to talk about one thing we can do to ensure our voices are heard. Not tomorrow, but now. Have your voices heard in terms of what kind of future we want by taking the 2020 census today at 2020census.gov? Now, folks, let me help you out. The census is a count of everyone living in the country. It happens once every 10 years. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. The thing that's important is that the census informs funding, billions of dollars, how they are spent in our communities every single year. I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston, Texas, and we wanted new parks and roads and a senior citizen center. Well, the census helps inform all of that and where funding goes. It also determines how many seats your state will get in the U.S. House of Representatives. Young Black men and young children of color are historically undercounted, which means a potential loss of funding for services that helps our community. Folks, we have the power to change that. We have the power to help determine where hundreds of billions in federal funding go each year for the next 10 years. Funding that can impact our community, our neighborhoods, and our families and friends. Folks, responses are 100% confidential and can't be shared with your landlord, law enforcement, or any government agency. So please take the 2020 census today. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov.